We'll turn the program over to Pam. Thank you very much.
Linda, thank you. Does this sound, can you guys hear me? So it's really nice to see this group here tonight. Every time I see that movie, I think, oh my gosh, it's an incredible story. So these are my friends. I'm happy that we're here. I thought I might tell you a couple of things that I thought as I watched the film. One is, if you guys don't know where the Robeson House is, it's basically right across the street from the Arts Council. It's 110 Witherspoon, and walk by it. It's been going on for a long time. It's getting bigger and stronger and better. And also in the film tonight, Nancy Prince is in the audience, Bill Wakefield's in the audience, that woman right there, Shirley Satterfield, is in the audience. And I think I saw Seal.
No, Seal was supposed to come.
Seal was on the screen.
Carol
Helped, but we didn't see her face on the screen. Or if we did, sorry that if I missed it. But exactly. So anyway, I also wanted to say that Bill and I, when we moved to Princeton, we church shopped and we settled on Nassau, and I kind of loved the sense of history. It's an old church. I thought it was incredibly tied to the community. And when we walked through the church, there's a little plaque that said Woodrow Wilson on one of the pews. And I thought, this was many years ago, and I thought, how cool is that? Woodrow Wilson was right here. So part of the journey, you can see where I'm going on this, is the reality as I learned more and shared more together with Witherspoon, and also when the university said this is not good, I said to Bill, this little plaque is making me crazy. So I said, do you think we could just take a screwdriver down? I said, no, we have to ask Dave Davis. So I said to Dave, what if in the middle of the night, Bill and I went with a little screwdriver? So any Presbyterians here know that we could not do that. So we did the history and shared it with the congregation, and they all, to a person, said, get it out. So it's gone. I think it's preserved over with part of the history at the seminary, but
the Presbyterian Historical
Right.
Society. No, it's at the seminary.
Okay, thank you. And just one other thing before we start, though. I am the moderator. It isn't about me, but when I watched that movie and I realized I sit in that sanctuary and my grandsons sit up in that balcony where years ago they would not have sat. They call it the bleachers, so it has a different feeling now. And Barb, I'm going to start with you because this was your dream, and that's why we're all here. So would you tell us how that dream began and how you made it happen?
Well, first I'm going to say that Pam is my good friend, and she always says nice things, and it wasn't my dream. I was a part of the Witherspoon Jackson Joint Committee, and for those of you who don't know all the folks, Kevin Giff, who formerly was a member of Nassau, came to Witherspoon to join to support and help us with a number of things. And Kevin, in a meeting, after the meeting, said to me, it's so interesting that we're all sitting together. That's a history in itself, a history of a relationship. It's not a history of the churches, but a history of relationships. So Kevin was very busy. He works at Princeton, he's doing all this stuff. So I said, I can do that, I can take it on. I'm always volunteering, and then feeling sorry the same night, actually.
Right.
And the pandemic interrupted us, my health interrupted us, but we finally pulled it off and got it going. Maybe so our premiere of this film was October 8th, 2023 at the Nassau Presbyterian Church. So it's been kind of traveling through, certainly through our church and through the upper parts of the higher up, whatever that means. And when I think about what Kevin said to me, and I started reading our history and only glancing, I'm not a historian at all, but I learned a lot from Kathy Sackenfeld. She is wonderful. I thought about the first, 1762 was the first mention of the history of it was then called the Presbyterian Meeting House. And the congregation was a group of white, entitled patrician slave owners, and sitting at their feet in chains were chained black slaves, and they were worshiping together. Imagine that. So that history, for that really long time, from 1762 until where we are now, I thought is a story that needs to be told. So it was a discovery for me because there was so much to think about, there were many things to talk about, and much to do. We had, by the way, a wonderful committee of folks from, I don't have names and I apologize, but folks from Witherspoon and Nassau pulled all of this together. And the really great thing about the work of planning and doing and getting that document, my daughter said, it's not a video anymore, Mommy, it's a documentary. So getting that documentary together was a work of several people. And I can say Tracy, Kevin, Pam, and Kathy, who gave us so much in the way of just how to research history, pulled us all across the line. So I was like a cheerleader, but the work was done by wonderful people, and I still am so surprised to see that it works so well. I'm going to mention actually three people. One person is Robert Miola, who's not a member of Witherspoon, but this wonderful person who Reverend Davis told us about, who was willing to be the videographer, the editor, and everything else as a volunteer person. We were not paying him. We ended up with a donation, but he worked very hard. He's not a well person. I'm in touch with him, and I wanted him to come tonight, but the gift that he gave us of his presence, his understanding, his photography, and his skills was unmatched. We could not have hired someone who made a better match. That's why God is God, because God kind of knows what you need, and will send it. And they sent Bob Miola. I have two other people. One's a heroine and one's a hero. My heroine is Shirley Satterfield. Shirley has lived this history, she has recorded this history, and she's telling the story all the time to anyone who will listen. And thank you, Shirley, for doing that. I would not have known about so many things without you. My hero is Reverend Davis. I met Dave, I was a moderator of the Presbyterian years ago, but I was attending Presbyterian when he was introduced and voted into the Presbyterian. And so I knew what he looked like. So I started seeing him come to Witherspoon before he was even installed. He used to sit on the back row and be very engaged with the service. So all through the years and all through the ups and downs or whatever's happened, he's been like a light, leading the way, saying we can do this and it will be okay. So he's not here. Please applaud him for the work that he did. And having said all that, Pam, I'm kind of done.
Oh, no, you're not. So, Tracy, I'm gonna go next to you. Why, how did you get involved and why? But I think probably looking to your right, I know how.
So when Barbara asks you to do something, you cannot say no. She's exactly. So she did ask me, and she asked me to do several things. And I came in sort of late in the game. I think that this had been going on for some time, the planning portion of it. And I got involved, and you know, it was me, Pam, Kevin, and Kevin Gift, and we were really, that was the finish line, right? So as we were planning and Barbara was a little concerned, will we have people coming to this event? And you know, so it was, as I said, I was kind of conscripted, and Barbara's very persuasive, and I had a really good time. And you know, I will say this, I wasn't in the video per se, but you know, a little video magic for you here. Bob Miola, who was the director and the videographer, Carol Worthine and I were actually the interviewers. So everyone who was interviewed, from Shirley to Bill to Nancy, they were actually asked questions. So a little movie magic for you, right? And as we were, you know, posing the questions to them, they were actually responding to us. So there was a moment in the video where you saw Mr. Mack, who said, you know, is that right? Well, I was in the room, he was asking me, is that right? That's right. And so, you know, it was very interesting, and apparently that's how documentaries are made. Who knew? So it was a lot of fun and very educational, and things that I didn't know. Even growing up in this area, I just never knew. So I thank Barbara and the committee and everyone who participated, who's here and who's not here. Because this is a video, it's a documentary that I think should be shown.
We agree.
So, Kathy, one of the purposes of this project was to consider and explore the history and the events that impacted the relationship of the two churches. That job fell onto you, and would you tell us kind of how you approached it and where you researched?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as was just said, nobody can say no to Barbara Flynn.
She is. It's true. As for you know that.
Yeah. So she had asked me to participate, and the question of how to do the project came up, and I really was involved with researching the history from the beginning through 1846, and then other people picked up the next sections, which had to do with the dismissal of Reverend Robeson and the difficulties with Woodrow Wilson, which didn't directly impact the churches, except, as you said, eventually the realization that the plaque needed to go, and the important integrated housing initiatives that were described quite well in the video. So in a sense, if you watch the video, you've got the human side, the personal side of what was really in the background of the research. But I would like to say a little bit more about the history from 1755 to 1846, because it was a bit more fraught than maybe came through in the video. I think what you said at the beginning of the patrician white elites with their slaves there in chains is a good thing to remember for the starting point. But we don't have any records actually about membership until 1792, because the church session wasn't writing up any minutes, and the presbytery told them they had to write minutes. So suddenly, after they've been in existence for 30-something years, we begin to have minutes. And at that point, we learn about the existence of slave members. All blacks, whether they were free or slave, had to sit in the gallery, the balcony, and also the students had to sit in the balcony. the pews down below, by old tradition, people in effect bought them. They paid rent for their pews, and there were different prices for exactly where you were. So it was a different way from the way that we, people still tend to sit in the same place most of the time, but, and it has been known that somebody would kind of act strangely if they came and someone was in their seat, but nonetheless it is a paid deal. But my approach was to look into the primary sources that are available about this situation. There were a couple of secondary books which gave a lot of clues of places to hunt further into the primary materials. Most of those are in the Princeton Theological Seminary archives because the old First Church in Nassau keep all their records there. The Witherspoon Street materials, I went to Philadelphia to the Presbyterian Historical Society, and sadly they only have 3 sheets of paper, and they have to do with the 100th anniversary celebration in 1940. But I was honored through this project to get to meet Shirley Satterfield in person, the legendary Shirley Satterfield, whose name I had known for decades. And someday we're going to get together and see what she's got in her garage, right? Because that's going to be the main place where we will see if there are any surviving records after floods and other difficulties on the Witherspoon side of their history and perspective of this whole history. The key thing that was mentioned in the video is that the sanctuary on Nassau Street, where Old First Nassau still is located, burned in 1836. The congregation was offered either to meet in the sanctuary of Trinity Church, the Episcopal Church, or to meet in the chapel at the Princeton Seminary, which had just been completed the year before. And when that happened, the white people went to the seminary chapel, and the black people began worshiping in the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood. We do not have, I have not yet found, let us say, any record of exactly how that happened. I found out enough about the architecture of the seminary chapel in those early days to know that the seating in the balcony was much smaller than it is now. It wouldn't have been big enough to accommodate even the 60 black members of the church at that time, let alone taking into account all the College of New Jersey University students who were supposed to sit in the balcony. And whether whether the black community worshipped only in homes, or also maybe joined in with another church, AME was it?
The Methodist Church.
That had been established in 1832. We don't know for sure, maybe they did both. But when the building was finished, the reconstruction of First Church, the records that I found said that the black community wanted to come back. That was the last thing in the world that I expected to find, because abolition had already begun to be discussed in the Princeton community. But, and this is mostly just from correspondence of the one man who did a lot of the preaching, apparently, for the Witherspoon community. He said that he thought it was unwise for them to come back, although it would have been all right with him, because the lower class whites didn't like them because of abolition. Now, you know, that's always nice to put it off on some other group. But the session of First actually sent a delegation to the black community people to say, please don't come back. And they went back and reported sadly that they had not convinced the African Americans not to come back. But then in 1839, two white individuals put up the money to build what is now the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church right on that property. And that's a story I would love to know about. I'm still looking. Was this something that somebody thought, oh, well, if we build them a church, then they'll be satisfied to stay there? Well, of course, it did work, but whatever the rationale of the donors. And the Witherspoon community, according to history, paid back the cost of the building. They didn't just accept it as a donation. But then they requested that they should be allowed to have a communion service. And they had a communion service in 1840, and that's why 1840 is thought of as the starting year of the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church. However, just a footnote to that, they were still all members of First Church, even though they call that their founding year. And over the time from 1840 to 1846, the records of First Church rolls show that at least 40 African Americans joined the church, the white church, but they all presumably were all worshiping at Witherspoon Street, building a church. And only in 1846 did 90 of the black members of the church send a petition to the presbytery saying, we want to be our own church, separately identified with our own name. And so the presbytery approved that and said, okay, have an inaugural service, and they did. And later in 1846, the first official commissioners from the First Presbyterian Colored Church of Princeton,
Church of Color,
which is what they called it until another couple of years later it was renamed Witherspoon, actually participated formally in the presbytery. So my point is, and there were more than 90 black members, and I don't know whether only 90 signed the petition, but all the rest left. But by 1850, the records, which sometimes said things like this, on the membership roll of First Church that reported to the presbytery, listed 0 black members, 0 colored members. So presumably everybody transferred to Witherspoon Street once that option was available. And I've taken the time to tell you that first to say it was those early years were more fraught than we might have thought, and that maybe there wasn't complete agreement either amongst the whites or amongst the blacks about which way they wanted to go in the future, and also to say how much we still don't know. And I'm one of these days going to keep hunting around and see if I can find anything more. Watch out, Shirley, there may be a secret person coming into your garage.
Most of it's in storage now.
And there may be things in the Princeton Historical Society, like black newspapers or something like that, that will give more information. Well, that's more than enough, but I loved my project, as you can tell. I love looking at primary sources. I've liked it since I was a teenager, and this was the perfect chance for which I thank you.
And Pam, may I say, you hear what she said, and you could imagine we needed a historian and we needed a videographer, and I already told you that guy. All right?
Yeah, that was a good day when
Yes.
Kathy signed on. So I'm kind of mindful. Oh, sorry, yeah, okay.
Yep.
So I'm gonna ask each of you, what's the value and the significance of what we've done and what we just saw? And Tracy, I'm starting with you.
Starting with me.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously, history is always valuable. Honest telling and teaching of history is always valuable. And I think it's something that if we're looking at where we are today, that we're not doing very well. I don't know how many people are from Princeton or from this area, but to have a church that's over 250 years old, or two churches, or these two churches who were together, and never know the fraught history that really continues today in different ways. This is a tragedy, and it's something that we should rectify, and we should always seek to do so, not just in the realm of Witherspoon and Nassau, but within our own lives and in our country. So it's a bigger sort of project, I think. And just this is just a kind of tip of a very, very big iceberg in terms of what we should be doing to learn about who we are as a society, and starting with these tiny churches in Princeton, New Jersey. So that's very valuable. And also, kind of peeling the veil off of what we think we know and what is the true history of our country, of our town, of our state. And like you were talking about earlier, Woodrow Wilson, and when I was growing up, he got us, World War I and the League of Nations, and
Yes.
this was the hero. But again, when we peel the curtain, we find out who these people are. And it doesn't erase him from history, as some people would like to say, but it kind of gives us a more comprehensive understanding of who we are. And I guess that's a long answer to your question, but I'm trying to keep it, So that's what this project meant to me, and still does, and that's why I'm here today. And I'm glad that all of you are too, and I thank you for coming.
You want to take that one on?
What's the question again?
So kind of what's the value of this film?
The value of the film is that somebody else is hearing the story, that the word is spreading, that all people are learning to understand, and to also understand from Kathy's perspective and Shirley's perspective, and honest telling. Kathy's stuff is very authentic, if you could see, by the way, if you could imagine that when we wanted to, I'm not a history person, but I'm a curious, I read a lot, but there was so many things I didn't know that I've learned. And my one thing is, of all the things, is Woodrow Wilson, when Kathy was mentioning him, not only was racist and all the other things, but actually, as president, he closed the civil service committee, the right of civil service jobs, which African Americans had before his presidency. And they did not reopen until the 1940s, when I was a little girl in Philadelphia, and remembering when people were saying, did you take the exam for the civil service? Did you take the exam for civil service? And to be funny for a moment, my mother, who was very bright, was a day's worker, domestic worker. She didn't take it because she said, your father will find out what I'm really making.
So story time. Kathy, do you want to talk about the value?
I think that the wonder of the video is what's already been expressed. Somebody can write up a history, or I could find a book, or I could write up 5 pages about all this, and people read it and go, blah, blah, blah. But when somebody says, my great-grandparents died because they weren't allowed into the hospital in Princeton, and we were not allowed, people who are sitting in this room right now, were not allowed to shop on Nassau Street, then that brings home the reality of how segregated and how white racist Princeton as a town was. I remember when I came to Princeton in 1970, I heard something about, the most southern town, or this sort of thing. And I thought, well, what is that about? And I did not know the history enough to know at all. And I have learned so much more through this. But the testimony, the living testimony of the people there is so much more impactful than what somebody can write up in an article. And I hope that this video gets seen far and wide, and if you get to see it more than once, each time
Do so.
it hits you a little differently and you learn a little more. And so I also want to say my word of thanks to Tracy and Carol, who's sitting back there, because
My partner in crime.
they were the ones who, you, as was said, you never saw in the video, but they were sitting off screen prompting with the questions, and then Bob put it all
Get
together.
Carol to stay.
Okay,
Yes,
Carol,
Carol.
you have to stand up. I just said you have to stand up.
Okay. Carol and Tracy worked very hard. I did most, not just so much of identity, but the questions and getting people to really talk about them. And Carol always showed up on time and was really ready to go. I like people on time, Carol. Just
What was fun was, and I think Carol would agree to this, we would have questions prepared, but then we'd ask something and we'd just pull something else out and we're like, oh wow, really? You know, and that was a lot of fun, so, and interesting.
It certainly
Yeah.
was.
And can I add one more thing for Nancy Prince, who talked about what she did to, you know, women were like saying nothing against the men who happen to be in the room, but women are just like wonderful. She was Dave's wife.
I know.
She was not the pastor, but she was the person who was offended because Reverend Robeson was driven out of town, and she said in her little voice, what can we do about that? You know, she's really good at that, by the way, and it works for you really well, Nancy. And what can we do about that? So the bottom line, though, is as they went through the Presbyterian to the Senate, the amount of that they were given to clear the debt for Witherspoon was $140,000. So you need to know it was not a small figure that the Senate gave to Witherspoon. And
Can
thank you again,
I just say, well, they gave it to really Robeson, right?
Rosen.
Right,
Thank
so
you.
Robeson was able to, they had a mortgage and they were able to clear that mortgage with that amount. But when you think about how long they had owned the house, how they lost the house, and what that would be in real monies at that time, I think, sure, $140,000, nothing to sneeze at, but when I think about what it could have been, I think it was a drop in the bucket. And I would like to say that I really enjoyed interviewing Shirley and Nancy, because you know Shirley has such a rich history, and she was interviewed more than once, actually. She was interviewed several times. You remember that, Shirley? That day when I drove from work to interview us.
Okay, so I want to say one other thing about Benny the Moral Ark, which I had kind of forgotten that was that much of the film, is that the four of us are all part of Bending the Moral Ark, the courageous conversations, and believe me, they have been some courageous conversations. Barb and I have worked together on it for years. Tracy is in another Bending the Moral Ark group, and Kathy is a new recruit to Bending the Moral Ark. So that has been a gift and eye-opening and transformational. So we're very, very grateful for that. And I'm going to also say what Dave closed with Dave Davis, when he said these friendships and relationships are embedded, and they are. They are such a, we carry this in our minds and our bodies now. These are part of this, our shared history and our shared future. So I'm going to stop, but I had a question for all of you, and I'm not sure whether I can go ahead and say this, but do you guys think this is a story of Princeton? Is this a Princeton story? Anyone want to?
Do you mean,
Yes.
is it just Princeton, or
No,
is
is
it
it-
representative of
Not is it
Princeton's-
just Princeton, but do you think it's a reflection of
Yes.
Princeton?
Sure.
Yes, it's definitely a reflection of Princeton, having grown up here partially between Trenton and Princeton. Everybody who knows me knows that my Aunt Mamie lived on John Street, and Aunt Mamie would ask me in probably the 60s, go up on Nassau Street to a particular store and purchase something, and I hated it. I had no idea why. I hated going on Nassau Street,
Oh,
hated it. I felt horrible. I still have that feeling that has remained with me my entire life. I am now 73, and I hated going uptown, hated it. But I felt that relief once I turned the corner from Nassau Street, started heading back down Witherspoon to John, the relief, because everyone in that community between John Street and Quarry and Green, everybody knew who I belonged to. They knew that I was Doris and Stephen's daughter, and Aunt Mamie and Uncle Irvin's niece, and Donald Johnson's sister. So that community, that Jackson Witherspoon Street community, knew who I was, but I hated going up on Nassau Street. And I could never figure out why there were two Presbyterian churches in Princeton. This is a small town. Why is one white and why is one black? And nobody, as a kid, nobody ever told me that. So I just had to kind of grow up and just knew that this is where the black people live and this is where white people. And so this is my whole thing with Princeton.
I was wondering if anybody had questions, or
Sorry.
maybe it's.
yeah.
Well, I want to follow up on what I said before. Is this just the story of Princeton, or have you heard of stories of other
Is this a story?
cities, towns in the U.S. where two
Is it the
churches
story?
and,
Is
one
it-
church
is
ended
this
up
just
being
the
two
story of
churches
Princeton?
because the blacks
Presbyterian.
got kind of excommunicated.
Well, I think that the story between Nassau and Witherspoon is unique, but I don't think it's the story of just Princeton. I don't know who said it. It's attributed to Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and several people, but 11 o'clock a.m. in the morning on Sunday is the most segregated day
Right.
of the week. This
Right.
is true. Churches are segregated all throughout this country. Was there a time when there were two churches who were worshiping together, and when black people had to worship in the balcony or couldn't be part of the congregation?
Right.
I would venture a guess to say yes, this is America, but this is unique because there's not many black Presbyterian churches
Right.
in the U.S. and there certainly aren't a lot in New Jersey, and so this is unique in terms of this church. Many African American churches tend to be Baptist, AME, not Presbyterian, right?
Right.
And also the fact that this is a northern state and we consider it to be very progressive and liberal. And what we see is just the opposite. And what we have been taught is that this is a quote blue state, is very progressive, always has been, But you have to also remember, and maybe some of you don't know this, that New Jersey was the last state to abolish slavery, and they didn't really abolish slavery. The Civil War happened, right?
Right.
So if you know the history of this country, the history of Princeton, the history of New Jersey, this will not come as a surprise. And I would venture to say it's probably not a one-off in terms of how we worship as Christians within this country. That would be my guess.
I would also like to respond and say what I said, that imagine these are two groups who've been worshiping together since 1762. So I don't know how many of those are around. We had, when you just think about the opportunity or whatever it was that kept these groups in relationship, very complex, but always in relationship.
Does anybody else have any? Yeah, Linda.
First of all, thank you very much for your efforts in getting this film made and in continuing to talk about it. And I was, curious about what the response has been, particularly from the congregations or any other audiences to which it's been shown. What have people said? Have people accepted the stories that they've heard?
There was a lot. There was a lot of enthusiasm at the event, and for the larger church, they're very happy that we did this. It's been shown nationally, the documentary, and we're been invited, but I'm not sure when to show it in the larger Presbyterian meetings, which happen, I don't even know how often, but it does have feet. It will travel. By the way, the Presbyterian Historical Society has included it in their documentaries as well.
And I think overall, the reaction to the documentary has been very positive. But I would like to say a little bit about, again, kind of the behind the scenes, because there were a lot of questions that were asked. Some of them made it to the film and the others were on the cutting room floor. But I think it's interesting that, you know, some people expressed kind of like a bittersweet, you know, relationship that we're still trying to get there. And I think it was expressed by several people, Terry, Shirley, you know, and mostly I would like to say from the Witherspoon people. I think because they were the most harmed in this relationship. And they're a little, I would say, skeptical in some instances about how this relationship will continue. Being on Bending the Moral Arc, and yes, some of the conversations are quite, well, very interesting. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't, and sometimes people are silent because people are shocked at and don't know how to respond to some of these very tough conversations. But it's a work in progress, but I would say overall the documentary was really well received. But there is some, you know, caution with some people, and hope, because as I said, hope is always what we, you know, if you don't have hope, then where are we as human beings, right? So.
I just wanted to say one other thing, that when I first heard about the mortgage of the Robeson house being retired, I thought, because Not in Our Town is very interested in the issue of reparations and reparations locally, I thought, wow, there, it's right there. We've got a model for it. And I have to thank you, Ms., that you point out that even though the sum was $140,000, if they had been allowed to continue to own it, the value would have been that much higher. And that's why I'm here, to continue to learn. As a white person, I find I can't just accept the easy answers, that I have to understand that there's always more. Incredibly, that you think you've studied and you've learned and you've read and you've listened, and there are always more stories.
And it's up to us to actually find those stories, and I think act upon them in a positive way. And that's why we have historians on the.
Right.
Good.
Thank you. One more question, if there is one. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. Thanks.
I'd just like to say, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
That I sit here quietly because this is a new generation that's telling the information. But when I came back home in 1981, I saw Aunt Mamie on one side of my house hanging clothes. I saw Miss Betty Moore on the other side talking about her greens. And it was like coming home. My relatives were all still alive. My mother was still here, and I knew everybody in the neighborhood. When I came back home, I was asked to join the Historical Society of Princeton. And I sat there and I listened to all the white history. And I said, no one is talking about the African Americans who live here, the Italians who lived here, and the Jewish people who lived here. So in 1995, we had the art exhibit at the Historical Society, not the art exhibit, the history of the Italian Americans. In 1996, we had the history of African Americans. And that's when I interviewed our people. That's when the university worked with us. And that's when people knew that African Americans lived here, because we took care of everything in this town. And that's also when I introduced Paul Robeson's son, who came to the exhibit. And then I said, we can't stop here. So I started a tour. And I trained about 7 people who were the age then that I am now. And they all had reasons why they couldn't do anything, because they were, whatever. So one person, her name was Jackie Swain, who was at the university. She's the only one who worked with me. Since she stopped, I was the only one doing this tour forever. And then I asked people in my community, and I was dogged. They said, why are you coming back doing this history? I said, you were here. You could have done the history. So that's when I started the history, and the students at Princeton High School, where I was a guidance counselor, they actually worked on a film that was on YouTube or whatever for years of the history of Princeton. So that's how it started. I said, we can't stop here. So I worked with make it the 20th Historic District in Princeton. And then I have 29 heritage plaques, so people will know that we were here. Because 20 years from now, nobody will know Mr. Mack's Barbershop. Nobody will know about our 4 churches. One is about to leave because there are not many people there. And then now I want a museum, so people will know. So that's how this all started. And with the church, there were 3 of us who were asked by Reverend McFarland to research the history of our church. That was 1987. And that's what I've been doing ever since 1987. And people say, well, haven't you done a book yet? No, because I'm still doing research. And when I was on the Presbyterian Historical Society board for 2 terms, I was also the secretary. And now I'm on the council, the advisory council. I sat in that office and did research the whole time until we had meetings. So I've been doing research at the Presbyterian Historical Society for years. And that's when I found out about Paul Robeson's father being dismissed. Because one of my junior ushers, who was Ben Colbert's son, got up. He was the one who portrayed Paul Robeson's father. And he's the one who said, I was dismissed by the presbytery. And that was in my document. And the synod, 3 people from the synod sat in my dining room to use my document. And then Reverend Davis and Reverend White met me at the Theological Seminary library, and they used my document for the presbytery. And then it was followed up by Nancy, who heard that and did more research. So I just want to let everybody kind of know what I do. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you all.
Could I say
Nancy.
something? Yeah. This sentence that Shirley said, kind of. Okay, thanks. Yeah, that the worship service where the youth were telling the history. Is that what it was? Okay, and Kenneth said he had the part of
He was portraying Paul Robeson's father.
William D. Robeson, yeah. And he was dressed in a suit, I mean, it was just so clear and wonderful. And when he said, and I was dismissed by the Presbyterian of New Brunswick, that set off the fire in me, and that's what took me to the Historical Society in Philadelphia. And I was so lucky to be able to go with Jim Moorhead. Yeah, who taught history at Princeton Seminary, so that, he got the minutes, set up for me and read, and then I was able to talk it over with him. And I made 2 trips to the Historical Society with him, so that's a bright light for me in my experience.
So again, thank you all for coming. If you want to see the film again, it's on the Nassau Presbyterian Church website.
YouTube.
And YouTube. And also I would say in parting, anyone looking for a congregation, we have two, or a house of worship. Not that it's an advertisement, but we have two spectacular Presbyterian, open and inclusive congregations right here in Princeton. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists, Kathy and Barbara, Tracy, and Pam is our moderator. I just want to let you know that our next continuing conversation will be on Tuesday, September 3rd at 7 o'clock.